Gold is risk off. So people think the U.S. economy is going to boom. The stock market's going to boom. Why do I want to own a safe haven like gold when I can make a fortune in the stock market in this booming economy? They also think that the strong economy is going to mitigate the rate cuts. So we won't get as many rate cuts as the market might have thought. So they think that higher interest rates is a negative for gold. Yeah. Also supporting the dollar. We've had a big rally in the dollar since Trump won. And so that is weighing heavily on gold. Now, look, gold went up by about 40% during Trump's first term, about 10% a year. And so it wasn't like, gold didn't do well when Trump was president. But I think it's actually going to do a lot better, despite what the markets are saying right now. I think a Trump presidency is very inflationary, but that's not bad for gold.
The market expects a strong economy under Trump to boost stocks, reducing demand for gold as a haven. Higher interest rates could support the dollar and weigh on gold. However, gold gained 40% during Trump's first term, suggesting it can still perform well. Another Trump term might drive inflation, which the Fed may not counter strongly, potentially making gold a good investment. Peter Schiff exposes that if Trump returns to office, he's expected to push for low interest rates and quantitative easing, aiming to finance tax cuts and curb long-term interest rates. During his previous term, he criticized Fed Chair Jerome Powell for raising rates, calling for cuts and even negative rates. This approach could lead to sustained inflation, with temporary boosts to the dollar and drops in gold's value. However, these effects may be short-lived, as inflation could accelerate from tariffs, immigration policies, and tax cuts. The speaker, Peter Schiff, a well-known American stockbroker and financial commentator, explains that despite Trump's previous criticism of Bitcoin as a scam, his recent support likely stems from financial backing from Bitcoin advocates, who became key donors. Trump's current endorsement of Bitcoin aligns with potential incentives, like eliminating capital gains taxes and creating a U.S. Bitcoin reserve. This would encourage Bitcoin speculation despite its volatility. Young voters whom Trump seeks to attract are especially drawn to Bitcoin, seeing it as a risk-on asset rather than a haven like gold. As we dive into the video, remember to subscribe and tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. We value your thoughts, so drop a comment below and give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed the content.
When Powell's term is over, if Powell doesn't cooperate, because Trump wants low interest rates. If you remember, when he was president the first time, he was very critical of Powell for raising rates. He demanded lower rates. He wanted rate cuts. He wanted negative interest rates. He was upset that Europe had negative interest rates and we didn't. He wanted more quantitative easing. And the only way to finance these tax cuts without skyrocketing long-term interest rates is to go back to quantitative easing. So I think that this is going to be an inflationary 4 years. And I think the short-term impact of the tariffs, of kicking out the illegal immigrants and the tax cuts is going to accelerate an inflation that was already on the rise. So I think the dollar's rise is going to be short-lived, just like gold's decline. Now, by short-lived, could it go on for weeks? Could it go on for months? Sure. I don't know. I don't have a crystal ball as to when the markets are going to turn. Now, Bitcoin is rising, and it's interesting because with everything that I'm describing, you would assume Bitcoin would be going down, right? Because Bitcoin was sold to people as, hey, this is a safe haven asset because the U.S. dollar's in trouble. We have big deficits. We're going to have a lot of inflation. They're going to print a lot of money and buy Bitcoin because it's a better store of value than gold. It's digital gold. Well, actual gold is tanking. So why isn't digital gold tanking? Because Bitcoin isn't digital gold. It's really anti-gold. Bitcoin is a risk-on asset. But the reason it's rising now is because everybody expects the Trump administration to basically do all these great things to get people to buy Bitcoin, such as eliminate all the capital gains taxes on Bitcoin. Hey, you can make a lot of money on Bitcoin. It's all tax-free. And they're thinking that they're going to start a U.S. Bitcoin reserve. Yeah. And they're going to go into the market and print even more money, create even more inflation to actually buy Bitcoin. Like the last thing we need is the U.S. government to go into deeper debt to buy nothing, to buy worthless tokens. But that's great for the people who own those worthless tokens because they can sell them to the U.S. government, who doesn't give a damn how much money they lose buying these things because it's not their money. And what they'd be doing is they're rewarding people who voted for them. Trump, when he was president the first time, said Bitcoin was a scam. He said it was a fraud, said it wasn't currency. Its value came out of thin air, that it was a threat to the dollar, to the U.S. financial system. He couldn't have said more negative things about Bitcoin. Why did he change his mind? Did he really have this epiphany? No, he changed his mind for the same reason a lot of other people have done a 180. It was the money that corrupted him. So he wanted to run for president. And these Bitcoin guys are like, hey, you promote Bitcoin and we will write you huge checks. We will be your biggest donors if you just come out and support Bitcoin. And what Trump needed were young voters, because the Republicans don't do as well in the young demographic, because usually you need more life experience to be a Republican, right? There's an old saying, if you're not a Democrat by the time you're 21, you don't have a heart. If you're not a Republican by the time you're 28, you don't have a head, right? So younger people, they're naive, they're idealistic, they believe all this BS by the Democrats.
Peter Schiff points out that most government spending is untouchable: defense, interest on the debt, Social Security, and Medicare, which limits cuts to discretionary areas. Debt interest payments are skyrocketing and could hit $2 trillion annually, adding pressure on the budget. Social Security, Medicare, and Obamacare costs are rising, yet no cuts are on the table. History shows that even when Republicans have control, spending cuts rarely materialize. Instead, tax cuts often increase deficits. Trump will likely introduce even more significant tax cuts, extending previous cuts and adding more, like lowering corporate rates and exempting various income categories. These changes would increase deficits, especially given the national debt, which could be over $36 trillion. Although Trump promised more tariffs, existing tariffs under his prior term didn't reduce trade deficits or revive manufacturing. Many underlying issues with spending and debt suggest the anticipated outcomes may not materialize. Now, let's shift our focus to a video.
80% of the government that they're not even going to touch, right? Which is national defense, which they still want to increase, right? Interest on the debt, which is on autopilot going up at a rapid pace, right? 1.1 trillion. In another year and a half, it'll be 2 trillion a year interest on the debt, right? They can't stop that. That's just going way up. They won't even be able to cut enough in discretionary spending to offset the increase in the cost of the national debt all by itself. But then you got Social Security and Medicare that are skyrocketing in cost. Those are off the table. In fact, so is Obamacare, Medicare. He didn't talk about any cuts to health care. So that's most of the budget. And then what's left, if you look back at the history of governments, and I'm 61 years old, and I remember so many attempts, usually led by Republicans, to cut spending. And it never happens. I mean, sometimes they pass these bills that call for spending cuts 3, 4 years, 5 years in the future that never materialize, because before we get there, they get rid of it.
Would it be easier this time under a wet sweep, though?
No, we've had Trump won the House and the Senate in 2016.
Right.
He had everything for those first 2 years, and they increased government spending. They didn't cut government spending. They did cut taxes, and I have no doubt in my mind that they're going to cut taxes again. And the tax cuts we're going to get this time are going to be much bigger than the ones that we got last time, because he's going to extend all the original tax cuts, right? So we get that tax cut all over again. Because right now, if you look at the projections that the government has for future deficits, they assumed that the tax cuts don't get extended, right? So that's part of the budget. So the minute they extend them, right, you blow out the CBO's estimates. But they want to bring back the SALT deduction that they took out the first time. And they want to make corporate rates even lower. So it's going to be a bigger tax cut when we're already more broke, right? The national debt, when he comes in, is going to be well over 36 trillion, maybe 37 trillion. When he came in the first time, it was still under 20 trillion. Not that that was small, but America is more broke now, right? Yet we want to let the taxpayer off the hook with even more tax cuts when they should be having tax hikes, unless we're going to, slash spending, which we're not going to do. But in addition to all those, he never talked on the campaign trail the first time about exempting Social Security from taxes. That's a huge increase in Social Security benefits. He never talked about no tax on tips, or no tax on overtime, or no tax for teachers, no tax for firefighters or policemen or veterans. I mean, you're talking about an enormous amount of money. Yes, he's promising tariffs, but we still have the old tariffs. The tariffs he put in initially, most of them are still there. Biden never got rid of them. Now, those tariffs didn't turn the economy around before. They didn't even turn our trade deficit around. We have record trade deficits with those tariffs. The trade deficits didn't go down. We didn't bring manufacturing home. We've been in a manufacturing recession for years. And so the tariffs aren't going to change that. They may even worsen that. So there's a lot of problems that, everybody is overlooking with all the, euphoria, particularly market euphoria, because again, the markets get way ahead of itself because, the markets will do anything if people are betting on it, right? Money is flooding in, but they're betting on something that's not going to happen.
While markets are optimistic about a potential Trump presidency boosting the economy, underlying concerns about rising national debt, limited spending cuts, and inflationary pressures pose challenges. Despite promises of economic growth and tax relief, the impacts on deficits, trade balance, and the long-term strength of the dollar remain uncertain. How might sustained inflation and rising debt impact the long-term stability of the U.S. economy? Could Trump's support for Bitcoin influence the financial system, and how might it affect younger voters' perspectives? We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this content, please give it a thumbs up and remember to subscribe to stay updated. Thanks for being a part of the conversation.